Right.
This is last.
So last week, we got through the introduction.
Yes, we managed.
And one of the things that I thought of, actually, I think it was this morning, or yesterday, it was this morning, because one of my daily readings was from Timothy, First Timothy. And there, he's like, Paul, basically it was like, from Paul to Timothy, like it was very short. And so those times when Paul expounds, I know it may seem irrelevant, but there has to be relevance, A, because it's in the Word, and B, because he doesn't always do that. So there's a reason why he does those things.
Oh, it's not just because bear in mind when he wrote this, he wasn't expecting it to be read and broken down in Bible studies years later. So, it's like I might write a long-winded email, and then people studying it might think, goes on a bit, doesn't it?
Oh,
So
Paul does go on.
We're not saying for a second that it's not a nice letter.
It's an awesome letter.
Yeah.
But no, I'm just saying those first verses are important. Okay, so verses 8 to 10 are the next part. Remember, this is an ancient Near East letter. So typically, after the who is from and who it's to, is there's usually some form of thanksgiving and or a prayer, and so that's what we see in verses 8 to 10 here. Is that? So did anything jump out at you from verses 8 to 10, or verse 8, 9?
Well, kind of immediately shifting from speaking to the Romans and speaking to God, because he's thinking God right after that. Not unlike a sermon, where you might welcome in the congregation and then open in prayer. So he might be opening prayer in a way.
Well, I think he's just...
I'd like to thank God through Jesus Christ for all of you, because you made this...
Well, I think it's important to note that the first thing he does is thank God for the people he's writing to. So yeah, that is significant. Anything else that pops out at you at that verse?
Well, your faith is being reported all over the world.
Yeah.
So obviously, the church in Rome is doing well and has become the stuff of legend out there.
Yeah. Well, and that's what really got me all over the world.
And he hasn't even been to Rome yet.
Indeed. So here's a question: what would that kind of faith look like? Faith that's reported all over the world. What kind of
Gaither Vocal Band. Because it's international success really. Much the same.
They were enduring persecution?
Oh, they probably...
Oh, I don't know much about the church in Rome.
Well, we're going to find out about the church in Rome.
I mean, we know what it's like now. The Roman Catholic Church.
Oh, well, yeah. That's far different from this church.
Yeah, I know, but... Because Acts is basically Paul's action book.
Well, it's the Holy Spirit's action book.
I know, but
And the first 12 verses are typically
where
about
Paul
Peter.
went. But did it account Paul's trip to Rome? Or does it account for Rome at all?
It ends with Paul arriving finally at Rome.
Yeah. So maybe it might be too early to judge because I haven't read Romans in a while. But in Romans, it might talk about what the church in Rome was going through. But at this point, I don't really know much about the church in Rome.
Well, we will discover it as we go.
So chapter 2.
But that still brings me back to my question, though. What do you think that kind of faith that is reported all over the world would look like? Like what would make people be talking about this church in Rome? About their faith. Because remember, it says that Paul says that their faith is reported all over the world. What would it look like?
Lots of martyrdom.
Possibly
How can you have
yeah.
more faith than another area?
Well, how it's lived out, maybe?
Possibly.
Like I mentioned, persecution, like faith in the face of persecution, they remain faithful. Could also be how they were faithful in collecting money for widows
And orphans?
or not, and yes. So, just the things that they did
their collection baskets were bigger.
Yeah, I don't know, just,
So despite any hardship that they were facing, they didn't let that stop them from living godly lives, thinking of other people. Maybe, like I think of Stephen, the first Christian martyr. How even as he was being stoned to death, he was asking God for their forgiveness. So maybe how they treated those people who were mistreating them spoke volumes about what they were like. So I mean, you think of even people who are persecuting you, don't like you, or whatever the case may be. They will still admire you for being like kind and strong. Like they're going to notice those things, because it's quite often, that it's the reason why that saying, the blood of the martyrs are the seeds of the church, because so many people saw how the Christians were dying for their faith, and the joy that they had and the hope in Christ, that it actually persuaded them to want to know more about God, and they eventually turning to Christ. So I would think that maybe that this is the kind of faith, this is what was happening in the church in Rome.
I think there's a flip side to the example of martyrdom, because on the one hand, as you say, you see someone whose conviction is such that they're put to death, and you think, wow, I want to learn more, but also they're put to death as sort of an example to other people that you stay away from this kind of thing. So if you see someone who's put to death for their belief, you say, oh, I'll stay away from that belief, otherwise I'll be put to death.
That's true,
So-
but isn't it interesting how the Christian faith still grew?
Yeah, it is.
And
Yeah.
if you look at history, like communism, it still grew. China, like there's such a strong, large church in China, North Korea, and again, these are people who are, even in the Middle East, like there are people that still today are being put to death for their faith, yet it doesn't stop Christianity from growing.
It's not the only thing that's spreading that, is it? Sorry.
So here's my next thought, my next question. Do we have that kind of faith? I already know the answer to that for you. But do we have that kind of faith? Do we have a faith that people would talk about?
hopefully. That's,
Um,
I think it depends on the motivation as well. Like, I don't want to appear faithful so that I'll influence other people. So it's secondary. That's not, to me, that's not the purpose of being faithful. The purpose of being faithful is to be faithful.
Yeah,
If it impacts other people, that's great. So
but that's not the question I asked,
Yeah.
though.
but in a way, he has a point, because suddenly you're making it about yourself. It doesn't matter how faithful you seem
Yeah,
to other people.
I understand what you're saying. You're concerned that we're going to start focusing on ourselves instead of on God. But we do need to be examining ourselves. Paul says that we need to be examining ourselves, and we need to and we need to bring that to God. And the whole idea is that our lives are supposed to be a living testimony. So if our faith is not being seen and talked about, are we living as we should? I'm not saying yes or no. I'm just saying it's something to think about, and that if people are not seeing our faith as we live our lives, and again, like you're right, we're not supposed to be living our life, oh, I need to make sure I do this to make sure people see it so that they'll know God, because that's not what it's all about. It's having our focus, and so are we living are we living out the intimate relationship that we have with God? Because ultimately, the faith that we have, that people see, is going to come directly from our intimate relationship with God. If we don't have a close, deep, intimate relationship with God, we're not going to live out that faith, right? What we live and what people see should be reflecting what's in our hearts. You know, as Jesus says, from the overflow of the mouth, or from overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks. What comes in our heart, what's in our hearts, is going to come out. If it's yuck is coming out. We can hide it for a while, but eventually people are going to see it for what it is. But if we have the love of God in our hearts, that's what's gonna come out, and that's what people are gonna see.
Well, using say the fire department, Westchester example, if everybody was at the department, all the firefighters at the department, and there was an anonymous observer somewhere in the corner, hopefully, again, I guess that's the word I would use, hopefully, that person would be able to look at all the firefighters and say, oh, well, he's a little different, she's a little different, there's something different about them. So I hopefully, yes, that people would notice that we are faithful.
I think that sums it up. It's nice to have a faith that people notice, but it's not the pressing thing.
No, the focus always needs to be on God.
Yeah.
Verse 9, did anything come out for people from verse 9?
I think it's interesting that he says that I serve in my spirit. Because when we typically, when we think, or at least when I think of serving, I think of with hands, with the head, with, whatever.
Physically.
Yeah, doing something for somebody. But serving someone in the spirit, he uses the example of preaching the gospel and witnessing, and his witness. So, is he referring to that's the source of his service? Is his spirit, and it just is manifested through his hands or whatever, or through his preaching.
Yeah, that was the portion that stood out for me, and the question I asked is what does this indicate about how our faith should be? And then I know our faith is not, and this ties back to what we were just talking about in verse 8. Our faith is not an outward faith of how we look and act, of rules and do's and don'ts. And I think this is what happens so often with the Christian faith, is that it moves from the idea of a relationship with God to a way of life. And yes, the Christian life is a different way of life, but it always has to come from the intimate relationship with God. It's not about rules. It's not about thou shalt and thou shalt not, although that's part of it. Faith should affect our very being, changing us from the inside out. It should also affect what we do. We should be reaching our hand out to those around us as we share our faith in whichever way we are called. You can't love someone and not be affected by them. Can you? Think of...
Tell me about it.
Well, yeah. Well, seriously, think of your guys' relationship. How can you love...
I've noticed that we rub off on each other. Because I've noticed you pick up stuff from me. I must pick up stuff from you. You might have more examples, but yeah, it's true.
But it's not just when you're with each other. When you go out, people notice these things too. I mean, it may not be a conscious thing, but they notice. And like if like I love Ron. I talk about him. I do things for him, and I don't do it so other people will see it. I do it because I love him. Right? And that's our relationships with each other are like little tiny windows of what our relationship with God should be like. As intimate a relationship as Ron and I have, my relationship with God is far more intimate. Because everything is there's nothing hidden from God. Even if it's hidden from myself. Like Ron probably doesn't, well, I'm sure he doesn't know everything about me. I don't know everything about him. And it's not necessarily, we don't, like, oh, I don't want to tell her that, or I don't want to tell him that. We may not even realize it. But God knows it all. And he still loves us. And he still wants us to be in relationship with him. Anyway, I digress a little on that particular verse, but
It's good to hear you have a healthy marriage.
Yes.
Thank you for
Sure. Is there anything else that pops out, or do you guys have any thoughts to share on that thought?
No. It's kind of hard when we read a verse, but it kind of stops in the middle of the sentence. Because there's more in verse 10 related to that.
All right, well, we'll move into verse 10.
Yeah.
What in verse 10 or 9 and 10 together jumps out at you, or you have a question on, or anything like that? Or what does it make you think of?
Oh, the phrase "God is my witness." What's that meant to really do? Because he's saying to them that he remembers them in prayer at all times, but opens with "God is my witness," which does little. I suppose it's just a sort of "I promise I keep you in prayer at all times."
Yeah, just, I guess, letting people know that, God knows. And we often use that phrase. God knows
Oh yes, we do that.
right?
Well, there's one part of that verse I was looking for the other side of the equal sign, or the other part of the equation, and he refers to going to Rome, and in the last part there he talks about God's will to open the way for him to get there. And I finally found it just down later on. Oh, now I can't find it again, because he said he's been hindered. Where was that?
Yeah, we're
Oh,
definitely
there
going
it
to
is.
get down
I
there.
planned many times to come to you, but now I've been prevented from doing so. Verse, what was that, 13. So God's will overcome anything that's preventing Paul from going. He's been prevented from up until now, but he's praying that God's will, which he believes will overcome whatever's preventing him from going.
Well, I kind of wonder if, that's one aspect of it, that Satan is stopping him, but God overcomes. But it could also be that God was saying, slow down there, Paul.
Oh yeah.
Because this is not the way I want you to go. Because, Paul, yes, in verse 10, Paul says that he's eager to get to Rome, right? By the time he wrote this letter, he was likely already a guest of the Roman government, i.e. a prisoner. The book of Romans was written around AD 58, and Felix, the governor, was governor until AD 58. And Paul was brought before Felix, if you read Acts 23-24. So, like Jesus, Paul seems resolute at last, right? Finally, to get to Rome, where he undoubtedly knew death awaited him. It had been prophesied that he was going to die there. He probably knew that, because, remember, Nero was the emperor by this time, too. Because he was the one that finally killed Paul. And Peter
Are we
followed
saying
up.
that Romans was written from prison?
He was he would have been in prison. And so Paul has been trying to get to Rome for a while, but it isn't until he's a prisoner that he gets there. That's a hard way to get there. But the thing is that he's happy about this. And as we go through, as you go through Acts, while he's in Rome, he's not in Rome, sorry. When he's in front of, he's in the process of going to Rome. He's in the company of the Roman government. And how many people did he get to witness to? High people did he get to witness to the entire time before he finally got to Rome. And then once he was in Rome, he was living in his own house for a couple of years. He had guards, and he was free to preach. So people were coming and hearing him. And so all of the soldiers that would have been guarding him, they would have heard the gospel. How many of those came to the Lord?
Very accommodating, the Romans, then.
Incredibly. Because this is just like unheard of.
But again, God's will.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
nothing's going to thwart God's will.
No, and again, it may not be the way that we would like or expect. But if we're willing to be used, God will make a way.
Be like being in the military and being called to be a missionary in Edmonton, and the way to get to Edmonton is to go to the detention barracks.
Yeah. Yeah.
Tell me about it.
Military,
Oh,
the military
detention
prisons
barracks.
in Edmonton.
Takes me back.
All right, so, any thoughts or feelings come from those? Like, it's just amazing how God works. I find it's amazing how God works. And how he definitely answered Paul's prayer. Because remember, right now, Paul hasn't been to Rome. But he gets there.
But not the way not likely the way he expected
No,
to get there. So
no.
we should anticipate the same thing, that we may feel that we're called to do a certain thing, but we may not get there the way we thought we were going to get there.
Well, and that's, you'll notice, like, hear these words. Remember, Paul has been arrested, wrongly arrested, and is waiting to go to Rome, to be before Caesar. Okay, you can read about it in Acts. But listen to what he writes. I pray that now, at last, by God's will, the way may be open for me to come to you. I'm in prison. I've appealed to Caesar. I'm on my way, folks.
Yeah.
That's what he's saying. Woohoo!
And even though the eventual consequence of it could be terminal, but he's still in the midst of that journey from where he is now to what might happen when he goes to Caesar. He's still got all these opportunities before him all along the way.
And he talks about that again. If you read about Paul's arrest and going before Felix and Festus and Agrippa, and even talking to the soldiers, you can, like, he says, and even along the way, he's seeing other Christians, and he's like, don't, you're breaking my heart, people, because they didn't want him to go, or it's like, you're breaking my heart. It doesn't matter. I'm ready to die in Jerusalem if that's the will of God. But I need to go. Now that was, I think, before he was arrested. He was on his way to Jerusalem, knowing he was probably going to be arrested.
Was it Paul that wrote elsewhere that he would much rather be in the presence of God?
Yeah.
But he knows that he has stuff to do here on earth.
Yeah, I think that's in Philippians 1.
He knew that there was a much better existence later, but he was more than willing to do what he had to do in this existence.
And you can see that, like, you can see the faithfulness of God and how God works, but you can also see the great faith that Paul had. Would we do that?
I don't know. You say you will, but then when the time comes,
Don't.
I don't know.
Don't be executed. It's not a good thing.
Well, you know what? But if you're doing it for God, you have to. God gave His life for us. So.
But what's the downside?
Yeah, really.
Can't minister anymore.
No, I'll be partying
You'll
in
be-
heaven.
Yeah.
I get to put my feet up and eat sushi all day.
Yeah.
Woohoo!
There's sushi in heaven.
Heaven is going to be, like, we don't really know what heaven is going to be like, other than that, where there's going to be a lot of worship and being in the eternal presence of God. But no matter what we picture as what our heaven would be, we know it would be greater.
Yeah.
So as much as I think of heaven as being that, that log cabin in the middle of the woods with a brook going by and my own personal sushi shack,
That would be in mine too.
it's going to be far. I mean, what does the scripture say? Far more than we can ever ask or imagine is what God has in store for us.
If he barks one more time, we will do.
He doesn't bark.
Yeah, he
That's
is.
a yeah. Okay. Okay, moving on to verse 11. Or verse 11, 12, like anything in the next verses.
Verse 11 is just summarizing what ministry means. So,
Yeah, but there's one thing from verse 11 that I noted.
To make you strong?
Exactly.
Okay.
Well, because he says, I long to see you so that I may impart to you some spiritual gift to make you strong. Who is he writing this to? How did he just talk about the church in verse 8?
The church whose faith is renowned around the world.
Exactly. So what do you get from that? This church, everybody's talking about how great the faith of this church is. Paul's saying, you know what, I really want to see you so I can make you strong.
I'm sure he was just going to throw in his bit of encouragement. Unless the fire was dying a bit down there.
Well, he must have been lacking in some way.
Not necessarily.
Well, if he wanted to go there to make them strong, they must have been weak in something.
Okay, if someone was widowed, but she was handling it really well and was being strong, and you send a text saying, "I'm going to come down there, I'm going to make you strong," it's not suggesting that she isn't strong, but you're going to help make her strong. I'm sure the church was fine. He just wanted to, you know,
Well,
say some encouraging words. Be with them.
well, here was my thought.
Yes.
We never arrive. We never arrive at having a perfect faith, a perfect knowledge, because we're finite beings. We're like a little shot glass. I used this one day in my sermon. God is like, have you ever, when you've been to Superstore, have you ever seen those great big stuffed sheep they usually have out around this time of year? Great big stuffed, I bought one.
Do you mean rabbits?
No, sheep. It was a sheep. And it's about yay big.
Easter
It's like you barely get your, no? I bought one once. Anyway, and the church knows what I'm talking about because I used it for our Good Friday play last
Okay.
year. And then I gave it to somebody. And then we actually used it at Christmas as well. Anyway, so like God's this great big sheep. Now try and get it in that shot glass.
Yeah.
Is it going to happen?
No.
It's not going to happen.
Ooh, get it wet.
We are finite beings. And we have an infinite God who's far bigger than the sheep. And no matter how much we dig into God's Word, no matter how much we delve into the heart of God, we're never going to get it all. We're never going to arrive.
That's a shame. This was lovely.
Towers in the journey, Charlie.
Yeah.
But to me, it's also the motivation as to why he was going to make the journey. Like for us, like okay, I'll only speak for myself. Typically, when I want to make a journey, it's, oh, I'd like to see this. I'd like to do that. But that's not the motivation for the journey here. He's saying, I'm going to go there for them, not for me. He's going to go for them.
Very, very not forward thinking, but in a way it's forward thinking because Paul is always thinking of other people. Like like when you were just talking about with Philippians, I'd really like to be with the Lord, but it's better that I'm here with you because God has this ministry for me to do, so I guess I'll stay for you guys.
Yeah.
Surely he would get something out of it as well. If you're in prison and you're going to a church with faith that's renowned around the world, you'll get a bit of encouragement
Yeah, but
yourself
he doesn't.
in what's, I would say, a really dark time.
He doesn't actually get to the church, but the church
No, but-
comes to him. But, of course, anytime, there's no way. If we are in the center of God's will, doing what God has called us to do, of course we're going to be blessed. But we don't do, but that's not our motivation.
No, that's
No.
not.
Our motivation is others.
But the blessings might be in eternity.
Yeah.
It may not be a
True.
very blessed life right now.
Yeah.
But, true, but I find it, I don't believe that in even the darkest of circumstances, God does not send something. Because God is present, even in our suffering. And so there's always something. It could be something as that just brings a little joy to your heart. From maybe you're in some dark, dank prison. And back then it would have been dark, dank prison. But you've got a window way up there. And at a certain point in the day, the sun shines in and makes a little bright spot.
Yeah.
That's still God.
Yeah, that's true.
Well, even consider, you mentioned Stephen when he was being stoned. Heaven was opened up to him, and I don't imagine he was downtrodden, but he was probably joyful, like, wow, look, folk, oh, wow, look, folk. He was doing it. So yeah, in the journey that Paul was on, I would think he was still like, wow, look at the blessings that I'm seeing around me. I'm getting to do this. I'm getting to do that. Yeah, folk, we're gonna hit Rome, but anyway, it's still gonna be a blessed trip.
I mean, you think about back in the 1800s when slavery was happening, and even in the midst of their hard work and their they were beaten, and they were, I mean, they just weren't treated as people, they weren't even treated as well as the animals, right? But they still had a joy. How many of the great spirituals, like what is that? It's in the piano book.
Go down, Moses.
No, there's.
You're talking about songs, right?
Yeah, it's one of our piano books. Anyway, it's a well-known one that I just can't think of off the top of my head. But so many of the good spirituals that came out of it came from slaves who, even in the midst of being beaten, raped, tortured, worked to death, still had the love of God in their hearts, and that joy carried them through.
Yeah.
It is well with my soul that
No.
he'd lost. No, just let me finish. That he had lost his wife and lost his children. Something
Yeah,
like
they
that.
had
So
some.
you're still
Yes,
it is well
yes.
with my soul.
Yes.
There's a few like that, aren't there? Amazing Grace was one, wasn't it? He basically wrote it after everyone he loved died. No?
I think that's so, but I do now remember it as well with my soul, because his wife and daughter were on a ship to come see him, and the ship sank.
That was Amazing Grace, wasn't it?
I think
Yeah.
it's as well with my soul.
No, I don't think it was amazing.
Anyway,
Grace.
we'll look it up later. Anyway, getting a little off topic. Point being, though, that there is always something in the midst of what's going on. I mean, a lot of people, even in the midst of this COVID-19 thing, like, there are people that are living in fear,
Oh, yeah.
terrified
Oh,
to even look at somebody, because they're so afraid. They're cleaning everything. Their hands are raw. They're terrified.
That's how you catch it, looking at people. And also, just to touch on something, slavery was not unique to the 1700s.
Well, no, I mean, it was back in the ancient times,
It was
but
back in the Bible, too.
that's what I meant by ancient times.
Oh.
But how the African American, well, they weren't Americans, how the Africans were treated was far worse, I think, than what most went through. Because slavery was just, back in the ancient Near East, was it was just a thing. It was just commerce.
Free labor.
Yeah, like it wasn't that big a deal. I mean, even as bad as the Israelites were treated in Egypt was nothing compared to what happened to the Africans when they were brought over. I mean, that was horrendous.
I learned this, too, so.
Yeah. So
We can have slavery now with prisons.
there's still slavery. What do you think human trafficking is? Prostitution.
No, I know what that is, but I'm talking about sanctioned slavery. Because in prisons you have labor, they make artillery shells, they make all kinds of stuff, they're not paid. So you can argue.
They do get.
They
do.
paid.
Oh,
They-
good.
they get-
That's
they
been
get-
fixed. Wonderful.
Anyway.
Two options. I can go down and whack the dog, or I can bring up the dog.
Well, you don't want to bring them up because you're sad.
Okay, so should I go whack him and then come back up?
Just leave them. Ignore them.
Ooh, alright.
Ignore
There will be a point where I just can't ignore him. I'm just going to have to go downstairs.
Alright, drink your coffee. Be happy.
Well, this will make me even testier. So.
Okay, just put that coffee down.
Are we looking at verse 12 yet? Because he said the second half of that. Because
Yeah.
he talks, then he starts to go, be mutually encouraged by each other's faith.
You
so there is a
Yeah, okay.
give and take as well. I mean, it seems like his primary reason for going to Rome was to make them strong. But he also says, but in doing so, we're going to be mutually encouraged. It's like, I'm going to go there to help you guys. I'm going to be encouraged as well.
Yeah. God is a God of community. He's a triune God, right? 3 persons in one. And he created us for community. Faith isn't a person. Faith is not personal. Anybody that
beg your
talks
pardon?
about having a personal faith isn't personal.
Oh, okay.
Well, it shouldn't be.
Well, I mean, that doesn't mean that you don't personally have faith. That's not what I mean. Everybody needs to have faith personally, but it's not personal in terms of learning, growing, worshiping, living.
Witnessing.
We all need one another. That's why God created community. And this is the way Paul uses the analogy of a body to describe the church. Each of us is a part that makes up a whole. We need each other. Even Super Apostle Paul longs for others in the faith to encourage him and help him grow in faith. we cannot be an island. So people that say, I don't need church, I don't need other Christians, I don't need Bible study or whatever, they're not living a biblical Christian faith. Focus on what the discussion, not on the dog. Charlie.
Yeah.
You cannot be a healthy Christian and be an island. Because if that's what you think, then you don't actually know God, because God is a God of community. God created us for community. And there's nothing in the Bible that says otherwise, but everything in the Bible that points to that. Yes, Charlie, you wanna push back? Feel
No.
free. No?
No, I was not sure that was correct, but I couldn't say whether or not it is.
Check out 1 Corinthians 12.
Okay, I'm sure there's loads of citations where what you're saying is correct.
All right. Any other thoughts on verse 12 or that section?
Well, it carries on down in verse 13 where I already mentioned about that Paul's been prevented to do so far. But then he gets into, like, if you kind of take with that first part, the start of verse 13, I do not want you to be unaware that I plan to come to you in order that I might have a harvest among you, just as I have among other Gentiles. What harvest is he referring to?
That's what I was about to ask. What?
I mean, they're already faithful.
Yeah.
They're already apparently doing a great job.
Yeah.
What is the harvest he's referring to?
Well, there are a couple things that I noted from that verse. First of all, Paul. You notice that Paul seems to be addressing Gentiles at this point. Now, the Roman Church had both Jews and Gentiles, and as we go through Romans 13 or the book of Romans, you'll notice that there are times Paul speaks specifically to Gentiles, times Paul speaks specifically to the Jews, and then times that he speaks to the church as a whole. So right now he seems to be been talking to Gentiles. So I asked sort of the same questions. Interesting how this is addressed to brothers and sisters, indicating that these are believers or followers of Christ, but that Paul is seeking a harvest among them. So I noted that as well. So what do you suppose he means by harvest? Could he be talking about money? Ministry partners? Bringing them to a deeper faith? Bringing those mixed in with believers to a saving faith? Because remember, the people who come to church, even back then, the people who came didn't necessarily all believe. They might have been seeking, right? In church, you've got deep, committed believers. You have shallow believers that don't really understand. Like, okay, well, I believe in God. I've accepted Jesus. I'm good. I don't need to do anything else. You've got people who are seeking. What is this all about? And people that might be just sort of caught up in well, my family's going, I have to go too, kind of thing. So you've got all kinds of people that would be in the church. So, good question. I have no idea.
Could it be literal?
Literally harvesting
Yeah.
them? No.
Well, the next few verses talk about Greeks, non-Greeks, wise and foolish, and down a little further it talks about Jew and Gentile. So, since verse 13, it talks about having a harvest among the Gentiles, maybe there was some segregation or some division among there, because he mentions verse 13 the Gentiles, but then 14 to 17 is him, different groups of people. So maybe there was some sort of division in there or something. Animosity.
Well, let's talk about verse 14 for a minute, because the term that sort of jumped out at me was he says Greeks and non-Greeks. Usually he says Jews and Gentiles. He's talking about Greeks and non-Greeks. Now, he's writing to a church in Rome, which are Italian, not Greek. For one thing, their main language was Latin, not Greek. So he says Greeks and non-Greeks. Well, is that just another way of him saying Jews and Gentiles? Or is he talking about various kinds of Gentiles? those who are actually Greek and those who are Syrophoenician or what else is there? Hold on.
Am I speaking about that, by
You talking to the dog?
the way? Talking to my brother.
Oh. Okay,
I give him a few cc's of that stuff, so I should be for a while.
so is he talking about Greeks and then Medes and Parthians and Elamites and Mesopotamians and Cappadocians and like I'm just listing off people who were there hearing Peter and the rest of the disciples the day of Pentecost. This is in Acts now.
Oh, I see.
But I'm talking about in verse 14, he talks about Greeks and non-Greeks. Usually he says Jews and Gentiles. So is he talking about Jews and Gentiles? Greeks
No.
being the Gentiles and the non-Greeks being the Jews? Or is he actually talking about various kinds of Gentiles? Romans. You know, Jews, Greeks and Romans or something.
Wasn't the Greek Empire, didn't it precede the Roman Empire?
Oh, yes.
Isn't Greek is relegated down, or Greece relegated down to the little piece of geography that they have left at this point?
Well, there wasn't really Greek anymore anyway, but the Romans took over the Ptolemies, and so there was no the Greeks anymore. Wait. There wasn't even any Seleucids anymore. I mean, that was gone.
Yeah, so I mean, so why is he referring to Greeks and non-Greeks when that Greek Rome Empire is gone?
Well, there would still be Greek-speaking people there. I mean, Greek was the language of commerce still.
Well, maybe
Their
that's what
economy
he's
is much
referring to.
better.
But what the remnants, whatever from that previous empire, whatever the remnants of that was, he divides them. You got the remnants of the previous empire, plus you have everybody else.
Well, I mean, yeah, maybe. It's really hard to know. But I just found that sort of interesting. And the other question I have is, how was Paul obligated or indebted to them? Because he says, I'm obligated, both to Greeks and Jews, both to the wise and the foolish.
I guess you're out there read Acts.
Well, is that two, or is that four different groups? Or is he expanding upon the Greeks and the non-Greeks? Is he using the wise to describe the Greeks, the wisdom of the Greeks? And the non-Greeks is the
Well, that's
foolish?
the thing. And this is the question I asked him, again, is he referring to financial aid from the fact that there are many fellow workers with him that are from a variety of nations? Because remember, when you look through Acts, a lot of the people who are fellow laborers are not Jewish, or they're half Jewish.
If you're half Jewish, are you Jew or Gentile? Or are you a
It depends.
Jewentile?
It depends. It depends on the century you're in.
So if he's obliged to the Greeks / wise, maybe he appreciates the wisdom of the Greeks. Yes. If that's like, if he's duplicating it as his explanation of saying that the Greeks are the wise and the non-Greeks are the foolish. Because in verse 15 he carries on, he says, that is why I was so eager to preach the gospel also to you who are in Rome. So he's expanding on it again, saying he's eager to preach to them. Maybe it's because the Greek wisdom was too worldly. I mean, it was great because of all the leaps and bounds that the Greek culture brought, but it still wasn't enough.
Well, you think about when Paul was in Athens, and he went around looking at all the monuments and memorials to all the different gods, and then he found one to an unknown God. They had so many. There was such a mixed bag of beliefs. But Paul starts expounding to them. Let me tell you about this unknown God, right? So again, it's it's hard to say, like, he's obligated, and when he means, what does he mean by obligated? Is it because he feels that he's got an obligation to them because of something they've done? Or he feels obligated because this is what God has called him to do? Because remember, he's planned to come there many times before.
And something I want to point out that you just mentioned, Athens is the capital of Greece. So I'm
But
just
this
saying,
is
I'm just saying that's, so again, we're bringing the Greeks into this again from something else that he did with those, all those statues.
Yeah, but he's not
Worshiping.
in Greece now.
Can I interrupt?
Yeah,
I think this is best read all together.
yeah. Well, it
'Cause I
does
think-
help.
Yeah, I think he's just saying that he might have a harvest among you, as I have among the Gentiles. I'm obligated to both Greeks and non-Greeks, both the wise and the foolish. I think he's just kind of saying the gospel is for everyone. He will go on to say to the Jews first, then to the Gentile. I think he's saying it's Rome's turn. I don't think it's much more than that.
Well, don't forget, there are Jews in Rome, in the church as well.
Another aspect of this, I think maybe, isn't it Rome that didn't really come up with anything on their own? They became mighty because they were.
Yeah, they basically, they were parasites.
Yeah, so maybe part of what
I didn't
he's
know that.
referring to here for Rome is that something from the Greeks, maybe it's the wisdom that the Romans had, came from the Greeks. So maybe it is all being tied together. He's kind of breaking it down somewhat.
Tell you another thing, pizza isn't even theirs. They did nothing.
So, but the thing about verse 15, he is eager to preach the gospel to those who are in Rome. They've clearly heard the gospel because there's a church there.
Yes.
Not sure who got there first, but and the other interesting thing is because Paul says in I don't remember which letter it's in. I have to look it up. But Paul says that he doesn't want to preach the gospel to places where people have already preached. So why is he so anxious to go to Rome?
Just hasn't been there before.
Like clearly God has a purpose for Paul going to Rome. But it's quite. I don't know if I can find that quickly.
Also, chronologically, the order in which they appear in the Bible, that doesn't necessarily mean that that's the order they were written. So this could be
Oh, that's correct.
what's correct.
That the order is not.
Yeah. So what you're
chronological.
saying about him not wanting to preach anywhere else, that could be long after Romans,
No,
after he
because
wrote Romans,
he would have been already a prisoner.
but he still went around.
He made his trip from Rome, or from Jerusalem to Rome.
What do you think?
This is just a lot to take in. It's a lot.
So basically, Greek's economy's ruined. Rome invented nothing,
Romans 15. Just check out Romans 15.
and the gospel's for everyone, which means Jew and Gentile shouldn't matter.
Yeah.
But,
So we're actually going to come to this much later. Romans 15:20. It has always been my ambition to preach the gospel where Christ was not known, so that I would not build on someone else's foundation. So that's coming up. Stay tuned.
yeah. Well, he's not saying that he wants to build on someone's foundation here. He just wants to see them make them strong. What else was it?
Yeah, he wants to.
Have a harvest, whatever that means.
So maybe the Christians in Rome were not originally from Rome. Maybe they got the gospel from someplace else
And that's entirely.
and brought it to Rome.
That's entirely possible because when Claudius kicked all of the Jews, Claudius kicked all the Jews out of Rome.
Remember was it the storytellers?
Oh,
Or
the
storykeepers.
Storykeepers,
Yeah.
yeah.
Everything I know about Rome is from that.
Acts 11:28. One of them, named Agabus, stood up and through the Spirit predicted that a severe famine would spread over the entire Roman world. This happened during the okay, here it is. Sorry, Acts 18:2. There he met a Jew named Aquila, a native of Pontus, who had recently come from Italy with his wife Priscilla because Claudius had ordered all the Jews to leave Rome. So all the Jews were kicked out of Rome before Paul became a prisoner. And so, but yet there are Jews back in this church when he writes, which was in AD 58. So, what?
Well, how do you know there's Jews then?
Because it specifically addresses the Jews later in his letter to Romans.
I would say that if all of a certain people were kicked out of a place, that does not mean that there aren't some there.
Yeah, or some started filtering back as well.
Or if they, I'm not a Jew, I'm a Christian. Although they converted, they might have been a Jew at one point.
Well, they're still Jewish though. Their heritage is, their religion is not Judaism, but their heritage is Jewish. I think he kicked all the Jews out. And it wouldn't have been he didn't kick all the Christians out, he kicked all the Jews out. All right, anything else about, other thing I've noted here, verse 15. I just said, Paul is eager to preach the gospel, and even if he's doing it while in chains. Paul is definitely committed to the calling to which Christ called him. From this, it would appear that he is looking, and so this is my final analysis, that from all of this, from these few verses we talked about, he's looking for faithful people to help share Christ. Pastors, teachers, evangelists, apostles, prophets. That's what I got out of it. That's why he's writing. That's why he's wanting to get there. He's looking for leaders. Anybody else pick up on that or note that? Or if you look down through it all, like as Charles says, you read it as one.
Yes, well done.
I think that's what the harvest is that he's looking for. Verse 16, one of my favorites. I love verse 16. For I am not ashamed of the gospel, because it is the power of God that brings salvation to everyone who believes, first to the Jew, then to the Gentile. I love that. Gets me excited every time I read it. Anything stand out for you guys in that?
No, it's a nice verse. Definitely one for the highlighter.
And again, because of this, because of what he says here in verse 16, again, it makes me think that Paul's he's fishing for disciples and disciple makers. So he's looking for leaders. Paul longs to see the gospel spread and people saved. And of course he says first for the Jew and then for the Gentile. Some people might get their knickers in a twist over that.
I still do. I still get annoyed with that. But I know. Let's not go over this again.
Oh, we're going over it again.
Okay.
Well, Jesus said that when Jesus was, I think it was what was the lady that came? What nationality was she?
Syrophoenician.
What
Syrophoenician.
Like she wasn't Jewish. She came to Jesus, said, "Please heal my daughter."
Yeah.
And he said, "Nope, sorry, I've only come to the Jews first." Can't.
Yes, that always bugs me.
Yeah. So that was his mission, was.
And then he did it anyway, didn't he?
Yeah,
Yeah.
because
Yeah,
she should, because of her faith.
Because of her faith.
But that's not. But that is not the only
important part.
That is not the only non-Jew that he healed.
Yeah, I know. So clearly,
It's
I'm
a
right. It
teaching
doesn't
moment.
matter.
It's a teaching moment.
Okay.
But the Jews were God's chosen people. Okay, they weren't originally Jews. It was Abraham. And I think I went through this last week.
Yes.
Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. Jacob became Israel. Israel became the nation of Israel. They're called Jews because they are from Judah. They used to be called Hebrews because they were from Hebron, right? So the Jews are God's chosen people who were to share God with the world. They were supposed to be a nation of priests to go out. Salvation is of the Jews. It says that in Scripture. The Torah, which are the Holy Scriptures, every time they talk about the Holy Scriptures, they're not talking about our Bible. They're talking about the Torah. The Torah, the Holy Scriptures, were from the Jews. Who wrote them? The Jews, right? And even over half of our New Testament is written by Jews. Paul is a Jew, and he wrote, was it 13 of the 27 books in the New Testament? And Messiah was Jewish. Jesus was a Jew, right? This is why Paul says Jews first, Gentiles second, because it was always God's intent for the word to be spread from the Jews to the rest of the world. They just messed up on that.
Well, and one of them was Paul or Peter, who was, said, fine, had enough of you Jews, I'm going to the Gentiles.
Yeah, Paul says that.
Like, so he's, you know,
Because it was, well, he said that a couple of times. People used to get an uproar over that. So even though Paul was an apostle to the Gentiles, and this is something else. You read the book of Acts. Paul was an apostle to the Gentiles. He is very adamant about that. And Jesus says that he's going to the Gentiles when he's talking to
Athanaeus.
Ananias. But, okay, where was I? Yes, but he always went to the Jewish synagogues first. If you read Acts, he always went to the Jewish synagogues first.
When he went to a city outside of Israel, there were synagogues all over the place, and when he went to a new city, he went to the synagogue, the Jewish synagogue first.
And that's nothing to get your knickers in a twist over.
No.
They got to start somewhere. God said, Jews first. Okay. Doesn't matter. He who is first will be last, and he who is last will be first.
That's right.
Hang on to that one, Charles.
Yeah.
And there's even the illustration of being grafted in the divine.
Which we will actually talk
which we-
about later in this book.
So if you think of the vine as being God's chosen people, Christians are grafted into that vine when they accept Christ. But the Jews, even though what's the terminology that's used in that illustration, even though they are hacked off or whatever, how much easier they'll be transplanted back into the vine. So it's all comes together.
All right. Verse 17. Oh, anything else from verse 16? All right, verse 17. Anything pop out? Or anything significant come out of that? To give you a hint, the key is in this verse. Any thoughts?
It's the righteous will live by faith. I mean, I think of dead faith is one. Somebody said, my faith, and show me your faith, and I'll show you my deeds.
That's James.
It comes down to the believing, having the faith, but the righteous actions that come from it, that flow from it.
Well, faith is the key. It's by faith that we're saved, which is only made possible by God. It's faith that we live as the Spirit works in us to change us more into the image of God, gives us more of a godly character and hearts and motives. That was disturbing. And it's by faith that we minister. It's God who calls us to ministry of some type and equips us for those ministries. Like, it all comes down to faith. Faith is like the foundation. And it's a faith that comes from God first. What's the significance of that? I think we're going to close with this verse because time is slipping by. But let's create verse to stop at. What does this mean? How does this look like? What is the significance of this? How do we live it out? how should this affect us in our character and in the way we live? Let me go back and,
Faith should be the motivation, not the motivation, not the right word, should be the foundation of everything we say, do, and think. It should be foundational upon our life. Because we're going to live by faith. It doesn't say that we're going to go to church by faith, we're going to be missionaries by faith, we're going to, it doesn't narrow it down to individual things that we can do, but it's life, so it's all encompassing. Everything should be impacted by faith.
yep, anything else? I just want to read verse 17 again. For in the gospel, the righteousness of God is revealed. A righteousness that is by faith from first to last. Just as it is written, the righteous will live by faith. We cannot be, or let me ask the question, how are we made righteous?
Faith in God.
Okay. What does it mean to be righteous? Any thoughts from this side of the room?
I may not be the person to ask.
How would you define righteousness? Just in general terms, how would you define righteousness?
Well, self-righteousness is thinking you're justified just about everything. So righteousness would be living on the right terms, as far as God's concerned.
So is self-righteousness and the righteousness of God, are they opposing? Or can they be?
Can be, sure.
Well, they are. You cannot be self-righteous.
You can still be a good person, being self-righteous. You can still be a good person
You
and still
cannot.
do many of the same things that a person whose righteousness of God is their foundation. in their
Nothing
life.
that you
As
do.
an incredibly self-righteous person, can I just say,
Nothing that we do outside of God is righteous.
ooh,
Yeah, but
It may be.
But we're talking
It may be good. I use that term loosely, but it's not righteous.
Yeah, but we're talking about self-righteousness.
well, no, I was just
Self-righteousness.
But I'm not talking about self-righteousness.
Yeah, I was just using
Scripture's not
self-righteousness
talking
to-
about self-righteousness.
Okay.
We're talking about the righteousness of God. So how are...
Do you know the answer?
I have my suspicions. So
And?
for in the gospel, the righteousness of God is revealed, a righteousness that is by faith from first to last. So what was the question I asked? How do we live righteously? Was that the question? What does it mean to be righteous?
That was it.
Okay. We are not righteous until God makes us righteous.
So how do you know?
When we come to faith in Christ, when we
So
come,
there you go. Righteousness and faith go hand in hand. That was it.
yes, they do, because until you have true faith in God and accept Christ and Savior, but it's not enough to believe, and I think we talked about this last week. There's such a difference in when we say, "Oh, I believe something," and when Scripture says "believe," because that's probably not something.
You stay.
Because when we say I believe something, stop, stay, Kita.
I'm gonna take
When
a
we
little-
say,
Come. No!
when we say I believe, we're talking about we have an idea in our head. Oh yeah, I believe that. For example, tightrope walker. He strings a cable from one building to another. This is a true story. And he walks across. He goes across with a wheelbarrow. He even once goes across with a wood cook stove and cooks a meal in the middle, or omelet or something, in the middle of it, and then carries on. He has a wheelbarrow full of potatoes. And he says, you think I could bring a person across there? Yes, we believe you can do that. All right, who's the first? Who wants to be first? Nobody was getting in that wheelbarrow.
Yeah.
Did they believe it? Only to a point,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So that's that's what we're talking about. We say, oh yeah, I believe that. Oh, I believe that that's possible. Oh, I believe that's maybe even probable. But I'm not going to bet my life on it. It's not going to change. It's not going to make me act in any way, right? We believe it as long as we believe it from a comfortable distance. But when Scripture talks about believe on the Lord Jesus Christ and you will be saved, this belief has to be in your very core and completely change the way you think and live and who you are. Do you believe? And that's what God is saying. Do you believe enough? Don't you dare go to sleep on me. Do you believe enough for it to change you on the inside, to make you act? And that's the question we need to answer. Do we? So when we talk about, what was it you said? Oh, martyrdom. Martyrdom. We were talking about would we die for our faith. I hope
Yeah.
that my faith is deep enough that I will. But until we're actually faced with it, we just don't know.
Then you know what?
If we would actually die for our faith.
Oh, don't do that.
Well, the dying part, dying for our faith doesn't faze me at all. Yeah, fine. It's the method. Like if it's a long, slow, arduous thing,
Yeah.
I'm not sure I could deal with that.
Yeah.
Talking about martyrdom,
It has no water.
and it's really bad for you.
Anyway, so faith, again, getting back to faith, faith is the key. We have to have a living, breathing faith. That's what makes us righteous, and that's we have the righteousness of Christ. Because the minute we come to true faith, that we believe, Christ's righteousness is sort of, it's like a cloak, we'll say. We are donned with the righteousness of Christ. But the process of sanctification, of being made holy, is how we are actually starting to be actually made righteous.